This is MFG Out Loud. Courageous conversations about sales and marketing for today's manufacturers. With your hosts, Ray Zaganto and Allison DeFore.
All right. Hey, Trailblazers, welcome to our latest episode of MFG Out Loud. And are we excited to have Mr. Andrew Deutsch with us today? And let me give you a little bit of background about Andrew. He's one of the bright spots from 2020, that smudge of a year that we are all so grateful to have behind us, when we were all hunkered down and online and looking for new ways to meet new people and make new friends. Our paths kept crossing and crossing and crossing, and I'm so fortunate and glad that they did. Let me give you a little background before we jump into the meat of things today. Okay. Andrew is, he's the founder and CEO of Fangled Tech. And at last notice, and there's additions to this, and he'll share with us today. Fangled Tech is International's unique marketing and sales consulting organization, creating sales marketing platforms that accelerate entry into global markets for small to medium-sized manufacturers. He's got an awesome approach that works. Why? Because he's done it, and that's really why he's here and what we want to talk about today. Generate tens of billions, that's a B, folks, in sales growth in over 100 countries. So this is a guy that's been there and done that. And what you're going to find out pretty quickly is that if Allison doesn't intervene during the podcast today, Andrew and I will very quickly turn into 12-year-olds on Zoom, and we'll have fun. But anyway, Andrew, so glad to have you. Welcome to MFG Out Loud.
Thanks so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to it. You guys are always a lot of fun to hang out with.
Very cool, very cool. Hey, let's jump right in. And again, there's so many different directions we can go in, but right now manufacturers are clamoring for, they want growth. They see it. They know it's out there. They want to grow their businesses. Sales is a mystery to them, and I think hearing the story, you've got kind of an unusual path into sales and doing it within the manufacturing space. Why don't you share with us a little bit of your journey and kind of what got you here today?
Yeah, let's start with the short version so we don't use up the whole podcast. I went to college to study international trade and graduated with a bachelor's degree, discovering that without a master's, an MBA or similar, the kind of jobs that I would want weren't available to me. But I did have this job opportunity to be an executive in the nonprofit world. I was an executive at the Boy Scouts for a short period of time. And my job there is really probably where I cut my teeth as a salesperson, because it's the first job you could possibly imagine in sales where your product is a handshake and goodwill. So you're out, for lack of a better, there is no product besides goodwill. So you're raising money and you're building programs and you're running employees as your volunteers in your territory who don't get paid. So not only are you selling a handshake, but you've got employees that the salary isn't the motive. So that sort of began to build the model. And my boss, the guy that I worked for, who fortunately 20-something years later I was able to re-encounter, was a black gentleman that grew up in Mississippi, who had gone from a family where no one ever went to college to being a leader. And that also influenced quite a bit about the differences in culture and how wonderful it is to learn from people who don't look like, sound like, or grow up like you, which I had also learned when I was an exchange student years before in Sweden as a kid. So I had all of this sort of international and multicultural experience leading forward. And then I said, you know what, it's time to go back and get an MBA, to discover at that time almost every MBA I knew was unemployed. So I went back to school and said, I need a different resume. I need to be different. I want to be in this multicultural business world. And I studied instead psychology and focused it in the area of multiculturalism and also business. So from there, while I was working as a psychologist, knowing that I wanted to be in business, had private practice and worked and started to redo the orientation materials for the same exchange student program that I lived in Sweden with, and became the orientation director for them for their students that were going into Latin America on exchange programs. And that's when the sort of everything opened. So these chaperones would come from Central America, and they were the top executive of these big corporations that were in Costa Rica and Ecuador and these other places, and asking me what I did. And I told them, like, oh, well, we've got projects, we're trying to expand business. Why don't you get involved? And the next thing I knew, my business consulting business began. And we were doing really weird projects. And at that time in Costa Rica, imported cars were, I'll probably get it wrong, maybe 4 times the cost that they were in the US. Used cars were double, but the parts had no tariffs. So we literally worked to build a facility that would buy used cars at the auction in the US that were identical to ones that had been totaled in Costa Rica, completely disassembling the cars, shipping the parts to Costa Rica, building the cars with the tags from and the identity from the cars that had been destroyed, completely bypassing the tariff structure in Costa Rica. That was the sort of creative stuff that really began my career.
Is there a statute of limitations on that in Costa Rica? Or?
As soon as the government got wise to it 3 years into the project, they started canceling the titles of the vehicles at the accident.
Ooh.
So you could no longer have a deal with the wrecking yard. But but it was it's that kind of creative out of the box thinking before people started using that stupid expression out of the box that really there's other ways to do things, and if you're the guy who comes up with that idea, you can really advance trade. Well, in '93, through a contact I met from Ecuador, through the people in Costa Rica, there was a project in Brazil for 90 days. So I went to Brazil for 90 days and ended up living there for 10 years.
Oh boy.
And that's where the global part of my practice grew. So I arrived in a country that had been under a dictatorship, authoritarian government for years. There was no innovation, nothing, because you couldn't import or export the way you could in most countries, and the market had opened. And the currency, which had been 40% a month plus inflation, imagine 1,000% inflation a year. They were finally coming out with what was called the Plano Real, which was what stabilized the currency long enough to get back on the map.
Wow.
So I went from a guy in the States who had lots of creative ideas but really didn't know more than anybody else. But by changing those little bars on the globe, going south-south, I got smarter just by location, because now I was a guy who knew something in a place where they didn't know yet. So a lot of, do you know how to do this? And the answer was, I think I do. Give me a chance, because I'm not a big fake it till you make it guy. And let's figure it out. I speak the language. I can talk to Americans. I kind of know a few. And let's see if we can't start creating these trade relationships. So that was really the beginning foundation of how I began what I do now.
It's awesome.
What's so amazing is I feel like that's really, especially with some things you have going on now, that's the story of your life. It's like you're the guy that figures it out, and you seem to be at the right place at the right time, but it's because you said yes.
I said yes, but I didn't lie.
Right.
Those are the guys that drive me nuts.
Right.
Is, oh yeah, we know how to do that. It happens like in the marketing agency world.
Yep.
Yeah, of course we do B2B. They've never once talked to an industrial facility, don't understand it. They've been selling consumer products for years, and now they've got a whole team. Tell the truth. I have not done that. I think I've got the skill set based on everything I've done in the past. I'm willing to make it work. Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, that's total difference.
Big difference.
Well, and perfect segue. So what do you feel like are some of the biggest misconceptions, while we're on the subject of truth and non-truths, the biggest misconceptions about international trade? Like, what should companies be looking for? So two-part question.
Yeah, let me answer it with a little bit off topic to get to the topic.
Okay.
So the typical engagement that I have with a company that has never done international sales is, well, we've thought about it, but we're afraid. The ones that have done a little bit always sort of fit into I shouldn't say always, but let's say always because I like to exaggerate, always fall into the same, where it's interesting. They sell to England, they sell to Australia, they sell to Singapore, and there's a couple of places in Europe like Sweden, and you kind of look at it, well, how did you get into those places? Well, they got people who speak English there. So that was our target. And then they're in a couple of places that are weird, like they'll be in, I don't know, Uzbekistan, or they'll be in Bulgaria. Well, we met that guy at a trade show, and he spoke English. And that was the strategy.
Yeah.
So the trick to understanding international trade, first of all, goes back to the exact same strategic work that we do with our domestic customers, which currently actually make up the largest part of our business, is who is your customer? Well, you're currently, what customer does what you do serve? And understand who that customer is. And then the next step is, what are the problems, challenges, and otherwise that those customers have that you can solve? I mean, the dumb analogy in international sales, we make snowplows. So let's go places where they have deserts and try to sell them and wonder why it doesn't work. I mean, it's an exaggeration. So the challenge with international trade is, first of all, really understanding where are the markets where customers who can benefit from what you make are, and that you can do it in a way that their current access to those products, you can do it better. There's a certain set of differentiators in your organization, in your product, in your technology that allows you to do better for that customer than the alternatives that exist. And you notice I didn't mention price.
That's a key point that I think a lot of businesses either skip over, and I think I've seen some consultants kind of do their clients a disservice by saying, hey, no matter what you do, I can find you a market internationally. There are circumstances where you and I'll throw this at you. Have you ever told somebody it's like the market you think you want to go in is a bad idea because you're not going to be competitive, or
more often than I've said let's go.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. One of my jobs when I came back to the States, the market had crashed in 2007, and I went to work for a manufacturer of plastic strapping in the packaging industry. Very exciting. It's that green stuff that holds things to pallets. And believe it or not, if you're in the industry, it's interesting. There's so many different types of it. But it ranges from stuff that guys with their hands and employees wrap around and they crank it in place and they put metal seals on it. That stuff exists everywhere in the world. Now, there's also high-speed packaging machinery where a pallet of corrugated boxes go through, a press comes down, puts 3,000 kilos of pressure, speed wraps it, and if those straps come off, it's a disaster. That strapping is much more specific in how it's manufactured. There's very few who can make the high-speed versions of it. So you can almost imagine if you could turn a globe or a map of the world. Of course, the world's flat, so it's easy with a flat one. But with the U.S. in the middle, and you draw rings out across the flat Earth, the farther the rings are, the less product variety you can sell. The hand stuff you could sell to Mexico, you could sell to Canada, because the freight's very expensive and you could be competitive. If you think you can sell hand stuff to China, you're crazy. Mm-hmm. So as you build the strategy for that and discuss it with the ownership, they have to understand that when the other salespeople in the organization are selling the full book, all 100 pages of the catalog, you've got 6. Mm-hmm. So when goal setting happens and when those things happen for the international department, please don't talk to me about hand strapping. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So the viability of your product has so much to do with the complexity of it. It also has to do with the cost to ship it. In the steel drum industry, as opposed to something tiny in the packaging industry, steel drums, you're shipping empty cans of air. Unless you can make a drum that nobody else in the world can make, chances are you're not even selling out of the 5 states that surround your state. So all of these factors have to play in. And then the next is, does it meet their standards? We were involved in the traffic cone and lighting business in Latin America. And to bring those products in, we had to actually work with the governments to change the code for the types of products that would be used. So it's such a broad, almost impossible thing to answer quickly in a podcast. Yeah. But the way we break all that down is what we call market attractiveness studies. And we create a scoring system. So no different than I would do here in this country. If I've got a product that I could sell into, say I've got a product that I could sell to farms, I could sell it to landscapers, I could sell it to nurseries. So we look at each one in terms of what is the total possible market for my product? Do we know people in that market? Do we have competitive advantages? Do we know the right people? What are the barriers? And you score all of those things, and the highest scores are where you start. Or as I guess the expression, the low-lying fruit falls in that category. It's the same with the global market. What are, if you're in the snowplow business, first of all, what are all the countries in the world that get snow above X amount? You eliminate all the other ones, and then you do your attractiveness study based on how do they clean their roads, what are the number of traffic instances that they have, do they have places to put snow, or do they need to melt it, all of those things, and you create a scoring system and go place by place and figure it out before you go on the road.
Wow.
It's almost like the analogy I'm thinking of is that saying, when you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to no one.
Absolutely.
And so it seems like your approach is very similar to our approach with marketing, is slow down before you speed up and dispel the myths that, global means everywhere. Well, no, maybe not. Let's start with, who it is that you could be of real value to and service. And let's figure out where they are. It might be 3 countries. It might be 1. It might be 12. So that really resonated with me. I've never thought about international sales like that before.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. And this is one that disturbs people because it's about prospecting. And prospecting's become a thing where everybody thinks if you get a great website, people come and find you, you've prospected. So in the strapping industry, there were 2 competitive manufacturers who made equipment that were the hardest to make strap to run in because they were so high speed and so good. So the way we figured out where to go globally was we looked at where they had offices and where they had sales. That was part of it. And then who in that country used to be involved in that business. That was one of the ideas. And the other one was that the core businesses were manufacturers of corrugated, bottles and cans, lumber, and other industries. So then we overlaid on the map where the key areas in the world were that did those activities. So it eliminated lots of places immediately. And then the other is, when you hit a country, and I'll give you an example, and I love this country, so I'm not belittling them, but let's talk about Uruguay. So the cost to go to Uruguay and visit exists. If you were to visit Uruguay as a straight-on trip every year to go meet your distributor in Uruguay, you couldn't sell enough of the product to pay for the trip based on the total volume that they would need of the product in the country. So you have to also look at, well, is that country attractive, but it's connected? So you could hop on the boat from Buenos Aires and go to Uruguay for the day and come back and spend very little and make it worth doing business there. Or you just don't go, or you do it over the phone. So all of those factors sort of fall into that whole matrix. And then the next is, who's the right person in that country? Let's go back to that initial story of companies that think they're doing international. So you're selling into Bulgaria. How did you find your client? He met me at a trade show and we thought he'd be great. Well, you don't know. Is he the right guy, or is he the most convenient, most available in the moment? There's a certain country whose name I won't throw out there. I don't want to insult anybody, but you can go to a trade show in Germany, and the first guy to come up to your booth is from that country, and he'll say, I am the biggest distributor of that product in my entire country. I'm number 1. I can prove it. Boy, I'm so glad to meet you. Give me your business card. You put it down, and before the card hits the table and he walks off, another guy who looks just like him shows up at the table. I'm the number 1. It's the only place in the world where math doesn't matter because you can meet 12 number 1s in the same day. and if you don't know that, and you made a deal with the first guy that came, he's probably working in the shed behind his parents' house trying to get a business off the ground, and figures with a letter of credit he could probably build a business around maybe succeeding with your product. So that's another factor, is how do you evaluate your people? And again, that's why with a network that like we have in 120 countries, we can do a lot of that work much more efficient than most to really understand, is it the right person? Is it the right plan in that country? Do you have the cultural means to adapt the story of your product, and does your brand fit within that market? All of that stuff is important.
That's a good point, because once you've done the initial, the concentric circles, you develop the heat map, where the good opportunities are. What type of foundation do you need to lay in? And again, going, hey, you found the right people, to work with over there. What do you recommend in terms of the sales and marketing infrastructure to support those efforts? Because again, it's not just, well, we got a good enough website, that'll be our prospecting. How do you build that infrastructure?
It's an interesting question, because there's not a simple answer.
It depends. Yeah.
There's some countries where you might think to yourself, it's so inconsequential that like an Uruguay or Bahrain in the Middle East or something like that, where it's a viable market, but it's not big enough that it's worth you going there and doing the research. We have folks that can do that to a certain degree of certainty, to make sure that they're legitimate, that they're businesses, that they don't have, they're not mob affiliated. They're whatever you're thing you're looking for. But the other side of it is, there has to be that personal connection to understand if they fit within your culture. I've dealt with folks that, in meeting them, the hairs kind of stand up on the back of your neck, and then you get in a conversation and you throw out a few hypotheticals and discover this is a guy who'd be bribing officials to do business in the name of your business. I don't want that. Yeah. And there's countries where that's part of the culture, but as Americans, we have to understand something. If in the Philippines, for example, many times the actual buyer's commission is in the contract, but it's illegal to do that in the United States. So if you go to the Philippines and you sell and you're involved in that in the Philippines, you could go to jail in the U.S. It's unethical, it's immoral to be involved in bribery. You can't do it overseas, you can't do it here. That we see people getting caught doing it all the time, and it's not right. So you got to kind of know the lay of the land that way, and there has to be that connection that you can trust the person.
Yeah.
And then the next part is, you have to trust that they know their market better than you do. You know your product, and you know what your product can do, and you know the benefit that it can bring people, but you don't know which of those benefits matter to the people you're dealing with. My favorite example is sofas. We helped real high-end American manufacturers of upholstered furniture bring their products down to Brazil to sell, and to Argentina. And in the U.S., if you go into a furniture gallery and you look at a sofa to buy, they will show you a cutaway of the sofa, and you see all the layers of foam, and they show you, and they'll tell you the grade of steel they use in the spring, and how people in the factory hand tied it in 9 or 11 or whatever it is. They'll go through all of that. If you take those marketing materials that really appeal to the American buyer down to Brazil, and you talk to the store, people don't care what's inside the sofa, they can't see it, they buy with their butt. If you put gold in the sofa, nobody would give it. They buy with their butt, with their eyes, and the ability to brag that they've got an imported sofa, not a domestic one.
Interesting.
So take that marketing strategy that appeals to the American consumer about the quality, about the craftsmanship, about all of that. In Brazil, you're peeing in the wind.
It's some interesting parallels there, like with the manufacturing. What struck me was you can't just go down there and start yelling features and benefits, and they won't all come beating a path to your door.
That's why the Fangled way is to always talk about benefits.
Yeah.
Based on what you know about that customer, and you use your features as proof that the benefits are real.
Yeah.
It's never features and benefits. It's benefits and features. Yeah. That's the first thing we teach our customers.
Yeah.
You want to create gracious advocates for your brand. Benefit them. Don't feature them.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I want to highlight. That's a huge distinction. Typically, people in the U.S., if you're thinking about going international, once you get over Canada and Mexico, kind of don't count, and you want to go outside, the ability to do a lot of in-depth market research really is contingent on having access to resources on the ground.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of really good, reliable. You can't go find the Thomas Register, of Malaysia. It doesn't exist. You know, there are other tools and things, but if they're not supplemented by somebody with on the ground knowledge, you've got a problem, and that's a huge
Absolutely.
advantage.
Absolutely. And if you don't understand that customer in that country, or you have the right partner who knows how to do that research and bring it to you. And it's not unusual to say, someone says to you, I really think we can make money in our country, to ask them the questions and say, well, in the US, these are the benefits that we bring out, and this is how we differentiate to do it. Tell me about your customer in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And what matters to your customer? Why do they currently buy from the brand they're buying from? What are the benefit they get from it? And why don't they like the product? What could we do to excite them in a way that their current supplier doesn't do it? You have to have the people in that country you can trust, or you'll make, as I always say, you can always make the first sale. It's easy. It's that second sale that gets a little tricky, and the third and beyond that's when you actually are a salesperson. Otherwise, you're an order taker.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm sorry that I wanted to bring up, the other problem that we see with companies, oh yeah, we also sell in Latin America. You know, well, we don't do that much, but we're working on it. Jose worked in the shop, and he looks good in a suit, and he's bilingual, and we taught him enough to be out selling, and they put the guy on a plane, and he could be a brilliant salesperson with some training. But they hired because of convenience, and they're not getting the performance they would have gotten had they looked for professionals in country and done other strategies.
Yep.
Well, I was just going to say one quick thing, and sadly, we need to wrap up. Man, these go too fast.
Right.
So I wondered what your experience has been. My experience has been on the marketing side of things for manufacturers when, let's say, a company from Finland wants to increase their North American footprint. And I have experienced actually with people from there and other countries similarly, they think they can just come here or have salespeople here walk in the door and say, hey, I'm with Yadada out of Finland. And they think that you're just going to fall all over the floor. And then they say, how many do you want to order?
Yeah.
And we've had to tell them it doesn't work that way here. So it's, I don't know, interesting. I've had that. My experience has been the opposite with people coming here.
Yeah.
Trying to sell.
Yeah, it's similar to the experience I've seen companies where they're really mad because when they put up a heat map of the U.S. and their sales, there's this big area out west where they can't seem to sell anything. And you go, well, it is kind of a desert in Montana, but okay. You know, and there's no people, but keep trying. No, what you're saying is valid. And it's funny you mentioned Finland because I was just talking to a potential client in Finland 2 days ago. The Finnish people are so trusting. It would be unheard of for the kind of BSing that people do here in sort of lower level sales to do that there. So they come over to our country and they're not used to our level of aggression, our level of any of that stuff. So you really have to have coaching sessions with folks. And if they don't want to listen, you'll burn your brand trying to help them. So if they can't get up to speed to recognize that the relationship that they're going to have with Americans or Americans who understand them working with them, that then act as Americans.
Yeah.
That's really the formula. And it happens. I mean, people will get involved in our businesses just to try to understand how we do marketing, because we're so much more aggressive and precise in our marketing as a country than a lot of the other places in the world. And they get all excited about it. And the other thing is they look and they go, oh my God, it's so big. I got to sell somewhere. And it's not that easy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's baffling to me is when you try to, and I'm sure you run into this all the time, you try to explain to company XYZ from elsewhere that your methodology, your ways of doing things, that's not going to work here. This is how we need to do it. And they don't take your advice.
Yeah.
So I guess that means they're not the right fit, first of all. But secondly, that's just mind blowing to me when somebody, you know, that is boots on the ground, that has years and years and years of experience and successes is telling you this is how you need to shift what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they just decide, no, I'm not going to do that.
And the challenge in the role that we're in is we recognize that when we're dealing with a company that wants to sell in the U.S., part of that process is us selling them, which means training them and really listening and understanding and fulfilling their gaps in their know-how so that they're prepared to come into the country and do the work. So it's a lot of, it's similar, it's like you got a new employee who just graduated from college, had a few jobs in his life, got a degree, and now he wants to know why he's been on the job for 2 weeks and he's not the VP. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect is in full force. And I graduated from school. I've got more modern knowledge about technology than you. I should be your boss. And the way to beat that isn't to attack, isn't to call them stupid, it's to start asking questions. And asking questions about things there's no way that they could understand. And just keep asking until they finally recognize, oh my God, there's so much stuff that I didn't know. And then they respect you and they recognize your expertise and your years of knowledge. And then they can enter into that role where you can mentor them to someday be the VP of the company. It's the same with a foreign country. People coming from other places that have misconceptions.
Well, we're going to have to keep asking you more and more questions, because before we go, I want to make sure everybody knows you've got a podcast out there as well, called
The Fangled Tech.
The Fangled Cast, where you get to hear more about these fascinating insights and some really cool guests and all of that good stuff. Plus, a secret that we can't reveal yet because Andrew has sworn us to such. But he's got some new and exciting stuff coming out in the very near future that I know we want to talk about some more with you when we hope you can come back and join us again, and would love to be able to share more about that with our listeners as well.
I'd love to. This was a lot of fun. It's always good to get in a lively conversation. I love it. Thank you so much for having me on.
You could go on forever. So
Yeah.
hey, that'll work. So listen, we hate to call it quits, but we're going to come back. So for Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today. We loved having you and can't wait to have you come back. For our listeners, this was an awesome conversation. We sure hope you saw it that way and got some good nuggets of information. If you liked it, please hit the like button and follow us, and we'll follow you right back because we love having you hanging out with us. Please keep an eye out for Andrew and the cool stuff he's got going on. And if you enjoyed it, please tell some friends, because we love growing our tribe and would love to have more of you hanging out with us.
Hey, and everybody listening, keep manufacturing out loud because we need you. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to MFG Out Loud with Ray Zaganto and Allison DeFore. You can subscribe and find show notes at mfgoutloud.com.